Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, definitely hit that like button, hit that notification bell button, leave me a comment down below saying hi, and make sure to subscribe, guys. It would mean so much to me. So today's case is really important to me, and I think this topic in general is super important to me. It's something I'm very passionate about. I don't even know what you would call it, but I guess it's a type of abuse that happens within certain communities. And in today's video, I want to talk about one woman's story in particular. Today, we're going to be talking about a very brave woman. Her name is Nina Aouilk, and her story is almost unbelievable. The things she's had to endure in her life, the way she has risen from the ashes. I feel like it's a very important story to tell. So let's get into it. Now, Nina, I believe, is a motivational speaker, and she's told her story on various platforms. And I've honestly watched every single one of them, and I've tried to read every single article. But today's information mainly comes from a couple of her videos, but also from an article she did with this website called Desi Blitz. So I'll leave it down below in the description if you guys want to read her story. Now, South Asian households, they have their own form of tiger parenting, if you didn't know, and that can, relate to schooling and social lives of their children. But it can also show up in different forms of abuse that is often hidden under the excuse of cultural ideologies and traditions. These parents impose their own beliefs upon their children by forcing them into marriage and other acts of coercion. I feel like this also happens because that's how it was back in the day in the parents', country of origin, or that's the only way they kind of know how to control their children's lives. Now, this is especially true for women and young girls coming from these families, and the rules for boys are very different in South Asian households. And this kind of behavior or mentality, it doesn't change or adapt sometimes when they move to a Western country. So with Nina's story, we can really get a clear glimpse into what she endured in her life, from being a little girl to bravely escaping what can only be described as monstrous acts against her. So a background on Nina. So both of her parents, they were originally from Punjab, India, and they came over to the UK as most families did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Her family moved over in the 60s because they wanted a better life for themselves. And Nina says her mom was very proud of the fact that they came into UK on a plane and they didn't arrive on a boat. Back in India, her father, he was one of 7 children, and their family owned a farm in India, and they were quite wealthy. They came from a quite wealthy family, you would say. Now, when they first arrived into the UK, her father, he worked as a dishwasher, and Nina herself describes her father as quite a handsome chap, and her mother, she says, was just a housewife, but her father was actually a famous wrestler, and I'm not sure if he was a famous wrestler in India or if it was in the UK, but he was quite well known and quite handsome, as she said. And honestly, after everything she's been through, which we'll get into, but after everything she's been through, she still states she doesn't hold anything against her parents, that she believes they only raised her the way they knew how. Nina had 2 older brothers and they lived in Birmingham in the UK. So growing up in this type of family, Nina goes on to say that her family was not very affectionate, and she doesn't think anything of that, because most families around that time, or at least most South Asian families around that time, were not affectionate. They wouldn't say, I love you. They wouldn't, come here for a cuddle. It wasn't that common, especially back then. I don't know about you guys, but the way I was raised, I don't think we grew up super affectionate either. But as we got older, I felt like it came out more. And I don't know if that's because people around us, maybe the culture, but like my dad and my parents always said, well, my mom, not really. It wasn't really like that. But my dad was always like, I love you, especially like after we get in trouble. But it wasn't like a constant, like me and my my husband, with my son, I think we've literally talked about this. I think we say I love you to my son and my daughter maybe like 100 times a day. I'm not even joking. I kiss my kids so much. I tell them I love you so much. And even my parents noticed it and they were like, dang, like you say it so much, and it's a good thing. They think it's a good thing that now nobody is sort of shy, or I don't know why you'd be shy with your own kids, but especially in front of people, you're not like shy to say these things. It's so much more common now. And I think it's a great thing, because back then it just wasn't even a thing. So already from this behavior, Nina states that when she was first born, she wasn't received well in the first place because she was born a girl. And when she was really young, she was told by her chachi, I believe chachi is auntie, she was told by her auntie that when she was a newborn, her mom would leave her in the pushchair, like a stroller or pram. And when visitors or people would come to visit this newborn baby, because this family has just had a baby, so people are coming to visit the baby, her mom wouldn't allow anyone to pick her up. And due to this, even when Nina would cry as a newborn baby, after a couple of days, she just stopped crying. She learned to stop crying because she figured no one was going to come and get her anyway. No one was going to pick her up. And doesn't this just break your heart? Like, I don't want to get too emotional, but this whole thing is a whole debate. Like, when you become a parent, this becomes a full thing. Like, do you pick the kid up or do you not? Like, do you let them cry it out? And I know there's a time and place that people believe you should let a kid cry it out. But I believe there were even studies, is it Japan? Something like that, where the babies, like there were so many babies abandoned or something. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just remember there was something about babies being left in like a hospital, orphanage or something, and no one was picking up these crying babies. And somebody walked past this nursery, or if you would walk past this nursery, no babies were crying in that nursery, because babies normally cry. That's their form of communication. And no babies in this Japanese nursery were crying because the babies just learned that there was no one to comfort them. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. Oh my God. Just the fact that she stopped crying because she figured no one was coming in. That's like my worst fear. I don't want my baby or a baby to feel like no one cares. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's so sad. Like, these poor babies, babies' form of communication is to cry. That's their only form of communication. Okay, so moving on, at the age of 6, her family, they moved into a new house in Leicester. And at this time, at 6, she became a servant of the house, of her family. So her job, literally at the age of 6, was to look after her family, cook for the family, clean, do all the laundry. And back then they didn't have washing machines, so she had to wash all the family clothes in the bathtub and then like stamp on them and wring them dry, make sure they were clean and then dry. It's just, for a 6-year-old, it's wow. She was the only girl in the family, and she had to make sure that her brothers and her parents were taken care of. And she was very respectful. She didn't know any other way to be. And at this age of 6, she actually was quite happy in her life. She didn't know anything else, right? Like, you are raised this way, you grew up this way. She said she didn't even think anything of what she was doing. That's just the way, that's the only way she knew how. So at this age, she actually wasn't allowed to essentially be a kid. She couldn't sit around and watch TV with her brother. She wasn't allowed to, I guess, have access to the TV. So what she did instead was she would grab every book she could find and she would go up in her room. She would build towers with it and kind of just be content in her own little world. And because of this, she loved school. School had a library, right? And even though her and her brother were the only kids of color at the school, they would actually get bullied a lot. They would call them Packy, just horrible racist names. But despite this, she still loved school. She loved books, and books became her kind of friend. Sometimes she didn't even have a pillow to sleep on, so she would sleep on a book. So books were her thing, and because of this, she was really well read too. Now, despite doing everything at home, despite, not really having a childhood, having to take care of an entire home, Nina still did incredibly well at school. She only brought back A grades. And she did this in the hopes of pleasing her family. But honestly, for South Asian households, for Asian households, that's just, you have to. It's a must. You know, you have to bring back good grades. And I mean, she's 6 years old taking care of an entire family. You would think that school isn't a big priority, but she had to do it all. She had to make her family happy. Now, Nina also tried to achieve good grades at school to get the love and sense of belonging that she so desperately wanted, but it didn't. And she thought maybe they would just like her that little bit more, but it never did. That A grade wasn't going to change how they felt. And Nina knew that being a young girl in this community, that she was essentially just biding her time till marriage. So with that, she was just happy with whatever she received from them, really. She also wasn't allowed to go out or have friends over, so she was kept quite isolated. But despite this, she did have some friends at school, but she didn't really know what being lonely meant. So she didn't really feel lonely, if that makes any sense, but I know what she means. Now, a lot of people can say, you know, this is common, and in families, girls are often super protected. It's because, you know, they're doing this and they're setting these rules for girls only, you know, not the boys, because they are being protective. They don't want the girl to get into any trouble. They want to care for her. But in Nina's case, it was more so to take advantage of her. Nina wasn't really allowed to speak to her own family. I mean, she was a girl, right? She held no value to them apart from her taking care of everything. And from a young age, Nina's contact with her family was mostly non-verbal. You know, eye contact is quite, like, nobody really wants to look at each other in the eyes. So most of it's non-verbal. Her mom would communicate with her by pointing. And Nina just grew up knowing, keep your head down. Don't look at anyone in the eyes. Keep your head down. She had to keep her head down, no eye contact with her, even her brothers or the rest of her family. If the family needed something, they would simply say clean, and then Nina would go and have to clean whatever it was that they wanted. Or if they wanted food, they would simply just say food. It's just so disrespectful. But again, she didn't know any better, right? And Nina knew her role around the house. I mean, it was evident to her, but it was something she actually enjoyed growing up. She didn't mind it. She thought it was her purpose to take care of her family, to do chores. It was put everyone else's needs before her own. That's all she knew, guys. It's crazy because usually when you're the youngest, and especially when you're a girl, you're spoiled, right? Like it's just not the case with Nina. But she does remember this one particular gift she got one time. I'll just read you her quote, because when she talks about this, it actually made me really sad. She states, "I remember in childhood, one of my favorite things that they ever got me was a blue crate, because then I was able to turn this crate upside down and stand on it, and I suddenly became like a superhero in the kitchen. I could reach everything within minutes rather than really struggling to do the jobs I had to do. This made my job so much quicker, and I could do things and be in and out. And everyone was happier with me in that way." I mean, guys, she had a blue crate, okay, as a gift. And she used this gift to please the rest of her family by completing her chores in a more efficient way. Like, honestly, if that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what will. And for the next few years, Nina's life just carried on this way until she was 14 years old. Now, a lot of ethnic households, I mean, it's not just the Indian families, they have like a formal room, right? Do any of you guys grow up having one? And this formal room or this guest room is usually like the nicer room that has all the nicer furniture, and parents display like all kinds of crap, like knickknacks and expensive vases, whatever it is. You know, it's like a display room essentially. Nina's parents' formal room was the same, and it was the place that her dad would have all his guests over in. That's the room they would spend their time in. He would entertain all his friends in this room. And growing up, Nina would call all of her dad's friend's uncle, and it's just a respect thing. So obviously not all of them were her actual biological uncles. It was just out of respect, and she would call them Uncle G. Now, her father, he was quite social. He would always socialize at the pub, and her mom would stay at home, you know, as the housewife, and that's quite common in Punjabi households. So when he'd go to the pub, he'd always come back with like a bunch of friends, and when he came back with them, it was Nina's job to cater to and provide for all these uncles, you know, as they would come back home and want to be served food and drinks and be catered to. So one of these times, Nina was 14 and her father had come home from the pub. And before I go on, I just want to state that this next part might be quite distressing to some, or will be. So I'm just giving a warning right here. So on one such evening, Nina was 14 years old and her father had gone to the pub. And Nina had just started her period. And like most girls will know, or some girls will know, for some it can be quite, when you have your period, it can be quite tiring. And Nina just found herself super tired. Her body, like she would wake up at 5 a.m. to start her chores and then go to school, things like that. And then she wouldn't finish till really late at night. So she wasn't getting much sleep anyway. So on this occasion, her father, he brings back his friends. And obviously when they come back, they go into that formal room and now they want it to be catered to. And Nina was just super tired. All she wanted to do was go to bed. But all the men, they come back and she goes into the kitchen and she makes the usual. She makes chicken and rice for them. And it must have been late at night. She must have been exhausted. But I'm sorry, this is just selfish. I mean, it's selfish, okay? The father comes back. He's like, I've had a few drinks. I'm ready, you know, to whatever. But he needs to be catered to. He needs to entertain his friends. And I do understand this. Yeah, let's just say I can understand it. I can understand how Nina would have felt, but that's just what she had to do. So she goes and she does her normal duties. And Nina obviously wasn't allowed to go to bed until everyone had finished eating and she cleared up all the plates and things like that, because her father was also somewhat of a neat freak. So he wanted everything to be done properly, you know, before everyone went to bed. So once all the uncles and her father had finished, Nina goes into that formal room to collect the plates and begin to clean up. And she says that your body kind of like has this messaging system where it kind of tells you something's off. And she just knew something was off about that room. So she goes into that room and everyone at that point is exceptionally drunk. And as she's clearing up the dishes, her father grabs her and he throws her onto the dining table. And he is the first person to rape her. From that moment on, Nina was raped for hours by the men present in that room. She knew each person by their voice, their smell, the way that they moved. And that was the beginning of a very violent for Nina. Following that, Nina passed out from the horror that was taking place. Nina remembers waking up and feeling that her hair is matted, and that was because she was surrounded by a pool of blood all over the carpet in that guest room. And she remembers waking up because her mother had slammed the door, and she did it a couple times to wake Nina up. Nina heard the slams, woke up scared. Her clothes were ripped, but despite this, the first thing she thought of was that she was going to get in trouble. That honestly breaks my heart. And me now having a daughter, knowing that your daughter would feel that way, having been through something so traumatic and be worried that you're going to get in trouble, as a lot of women and girls feel after something like this happens to them. And it's just, when something horrific happens to them, the trauma that led them up to that in their lives makes them think that it's their fault. It's just She was worried because the dishes were all broken. There was food all over the floor. The room was just in a disarray. And she was like, oh my God, I have to fix this. So she goes into the kitchen with her clothes half gone, half ripped. And she attempts to clean everything up. But her mom says, no, just go take a shower, get dressed, get cleaned up. And Nina usually wasn't allowed to take a shower very often. So that night, her mother allowed her to take a shower. So after she has a shower, she gets dressed again into clean pajamas. She must have been in a lot of pain, but she goes back to that guest room, to the kitchen, and begins to clean up the mess that was made by those men. After she cleans everything up, she then asks her mother if she is able to go to sleep. And her mother responds yes with an angry nod. Following this, Nina did not wake up for 2 days. She was just so distraught, both physically and mentally. And that was the first time in her life at the age of 14 that she had finally realized that something was wrong with her life. This vicious ordeal left Nina with such a horrific scar that she couldn't even understand what had just happened to her. For most girls, regardless of your background, your father is supposed to be your protector, your hero, the protector of your family. And to know that your father was the one who initiated your allowing how many men to do the same is just unimaginable. I mean, how did her mom feel? How did Nina feel? Like, at 14, she must have felt so conflicted, externally in the family, she's trapped. And then mentally, she probably just felt, I don't even know what she would have felt mentally. I don't know how she even moved, after 2 days. But along with this, after experiencing possibly the worst thing that can happen to you in your life, Nina had other factors to consider. She was of Southeast origin, living in a British society, and at school she wasn't well received. And after a little while following the assault, she was forced to go back to school. And due to not being well received at school, she was quite withdrawn. She was constantly spat upon, and teachers didn't even notice this. And they never noticed she was withdrawn. They never asked a question. And people have asked her, like, how did your teachers, not notice this? But she said for her, it was a joke because the teacher should have picked up on a lot more, a lot sooner before this assault even happened. I mean, what's going on in the home, But again, back in those days, and even now, I think it's quite difficult to pick up on things like that. But maybe if you're just more aware, I don't know. But that's what Nina states. Nina states that for her, she thinks it's a joke when people question, why didn't they know? She says that they should have picked up on a lot more, a lot sooner. Now, as if everything she had been through at this point isn't bad enough already, soon following the assault, Nina falls pregnant. Now, Nina was terrified, but she had to tell her mother. She had to tell someone, right? So she told her mom. And instead of receiving her, with compassion, instead of apologizing to Nina for what she had been through, instead, she was slapped and punched by her mother for falling pregnant. Her family then took her to a private clinic in order to hide this situation from the rest of the community. After Nina had this abortion that was arranged by her family, at the clinic where she had the abortion was the first time she would receive a glimpse of love and affection. That too from a stranger, from a nurse at the clinic. And after the procedure had taken place, Nina was resting and she was in a gown, and this nurse approached her. And this nurse then stroked Nina's hair and she offered her some tea and a biscuit. And that was the first time Nina had some sort of physical contact that way. And she thought to herself, wow, I can't be that bad if this woman is sitting here, you know, offering me tea and touching me. Like, she's touching me. I can't be that bad of a person. It's just so sad. My goodness. And following this, Nina's desire to be acknowledged as a human being, to have the basic needs of touch, affection, love, this experience triggered that desire in her. A freaking human desire, you know? Human desire to be touched and loved on. After everything she had been through, after everything that her family had put her through, Nina was forced to just carry on and live a normal life. In situations like these, you know, the mom slapping her for falling pregnant, it's always the woman's fault. You know, it's her fault she fell pregnant. That's what they want you to believe. And it's not the men's fault. It's the woman's fault. It's not her father, you know, it's not the men that participated and committed a crime against a child. No, it's the woman's fault for being a woman. That's how these perpetrators make the woman feel. After everything that poor Nina had been through, the fact that she had now fallen pregnant was also put on her. Even though they forced this abortion on Nina, they made her feel even worse about it. They had to keep everything hush. They wanted to keep the events, what had happened, a secret. And they made Nina feel so horrible, so much so that she wanted to end her own life. This would have been so exhausting for Nina. Her father kept telling her that, you know, she had tainted his white turban. And he didn't wear a white turban, but it has a meaning which I did look up to explain to you guys. So a white turban means a saintly person who leads an exemplary life, and an off shade of white means someone who is learning in the Sikh religion. So please correct me if there's another reason, but that's what I looked up. So her father was very distraught about the situation that had taken place, even though he had participated in it, because, you know, it brought shame to the family, and she had spoiled herself because she had fallen pregnant. But the funny thing to me, which I wonder if anyone can explain, they assaulted her. She didn't go out in the streets with men. So didn't they commit the wrong act? I mean, obviously they committed the wrong act, right? But falling pregnant is what spoiled her, not being assaulted by how many men? The logic, right? So like I said, following this, Nina just didn't want to live anymore. So she tried to commit suicide by taking an overdose of, I don't know what you guys call it. It's called Panadol here, but paracetamol. And back then, they didn't come in those blister packets. They came in like a tub. So she took the bottle, hoping to die. And she claims that it's such a painful process. You're in extreme agony. And when her family realized what she had done, they ended up beating her, punching her, forcing her to vomit. And during this time, Nina states that was when she really truly felt a sense of agony, like a mental agony, where she just wanted to leave this world. Again, it left her in this state of just of nothingness. You know, what was there to live for in her eyes? Now, during Nina's time, the topic of abuse was extremely secret and taboo in not only her community, but just at the time. Whether it was, you know, mental health or abuse, it was just all kept very quiet. And even though it took place in many households, within the community, everyone just acted oblivious towards it. So because of her suicide attempt and of what had happened to her earlier, you know, her falling pregnant, her family now decided it was time to take control of her. Now tell me her life cannot get any more stressful. So the solution to this was one of the perpetrators, one of the uncles that had assaulted her, would arrive to her house to marry her off. So this man, he arrives with a chunni. I think it's like a veil for brides, with a chunni with some sweets and with his wife. Okay, I'm not sure if this wife knew what her husband had recently done to this 14-year-old girl. Okay. So a chutney is also supposed to be a way a bride receives a blessing in the Punjab or Sikh culture. It's a long sacred scarf that is draped over the bride's head, and it's a form of acceptance of the bride by the groom's family. So this whole situation takes place in the front room, you know, where the occurred. And Nina obviously was triggered by this whole situation, and she walks into this room and she didn't even really know what was about to take place, what was happening. And her father says to her, "Oh, aren't you so lucky? Aren't you so lucky that uncle has decided to marry you into the family?" And Nina didn't even know whether to look up, to speak. She didn't know what to do. She had never actually been informed about what this ceremony sort of entailed or what was going to take place. So at 14, they placed this chutney on Nina's head and said, "You're going to marry uncle's son." And she didn't even understand what was going on. Sweets were exchanged and they had taken photos of this occasion. And again, she was not taught that this was a cultural tradition that would take place. When she was younger, she was never taught about this. She hadn't even gotten over what had taken place. And now she was about to enter into this whole new situation with one of her perpetrators, by the way. So her father then tells her that she had spoiled herself and uncle's son already had a girlfriend. So how lucky was she that uncle would have her for himself? So apparently back then it was common for the South Asian boys to get a white girlfriend, and that was kind of accepted. And they sort of knew that they did not want to marry off into their own culture, and that was kind of accepted. So the father decided he would have Nina for himself, you know, the guy that raped her. So her father then tells her that she is going to bear a child for this family, and that no matter what happened, this was going to be the way it was, and the way that she behaved in her current family is how she would behave in their family. He goes on to tell her that he had given uncle quite a lot of money and gold, and this was the price he had to pay for what she had done to herself. She was like 14, 15 when this took place. After being brutally raped by her own father and multiple men, Nina was now being forced to marry one of her rapist's son. Now, this was all a cover because this uncle's son already had a girlfriend, right? So this was all a cover just to have him marry an Indian girl, but technically Nina belonged to the uncle. So just to save face, they were going to have this Indian ceremony and have this freaking wedding to show everyone that the son had married an Indian girl, but really Nina was for his father. At first, they told her that, okay, Nina, you're going to get married at 16 years old, but that soon changed because uncle had his own daughter, but she wasn't married. So the tradition is that the person's household that's going to have the marriage, their daughter needs to be married off first. So it soon changed to a little bit later because his daughter needed to be married first before Nina could marry his son. I wonder if this uncle was going to send his daughter with an old man to be a servant and to be raped. I wonder what happened to her. I hope not. So a few months before Nina turns 17, her wedding is arranged and she gets married at the temple, right? But after the ceremony, she's sent home. She isn't even allowed to be at her own wedding ceremony. She cries and cries at home, and it's not because, like most girls, she's afraid to leave, you know, her family, her parents, but she's worried that what's going to happen after the ceremony is that they're going to come back and they're going to have a repeat of the night that she was raped. One of her rapists was now her father-in-law. And I remember when I was reading and watching her story, I was just like, I can't even believe any of this is real. But yet this is the reality that so many women and young girls are facing on the daily. In the past, the culture and community were supposed to be progressing in the UK, but traditions still lingered for many people who were not willing to change their views. Although many first and second British Asian men were allowed to have, you know, white girlfriends, a lot of them were still forced to marry someone from their own culture, at least to save face, to look good. But the issue is that often men are looked at as kings within their family, with women being forced to abide by their rules or not being able to question any of their decisions. And, just talking about this, like, it's really early in the morning and Jay just got me a coffee, and it's like I'm talking about something in somebody's life being so horrific, and here I am. Do you know what I mean? Like, not being treated that way, being treated so well by a man in my life. And I know it's just a coffee. That's not the point. It's so much deeper than that. And it's just, I'm going to ruin my makeup by crying. But it's just so upsetting to know that there are women out there just who don't know what this is like. They only know one way of being treated, and it's not a good one. This marriage had taken place as a way to keep Nina silent about the rape and the pregnancies, the rapes and the pregnancy, not out of concern for her future and well-being or love. The next part of Nina's life took her from the age of 17, being a servant in her family's home, to now being a servant in her husband's home. Her husband, the young son, wanted nothing to do with her. He had his own room. He had his own girlfriend, and all of them had their own rooms except for Nina. All their rooms were upstairs, and Nina had this tiny little room downstairs. It was almost like a cupboard, she states. And again, her job in this home was just to cook and clean and take care of this family. But the difference in this home was that they wanted Nina to work. Now, the money that Nina's father had given to this man was a lot, but they wanted more money. They were not as well off as Nina's family was. So they wanted Nina to go out and look for a job. And this was probably one of the best things to happen to Nina. So she goes out, looks for this job, and she ends up getting a job in a very good, like a very high job in a good corporation. And this obviously exposed her to a lot of different people and situations. And people at her job would ask her, well, why are your ankles bleeding? And she wouldn't tell them the truth. The truth was her father-in-law was abusing her. The truth was that he would tie her up with a coat hanger by her ankles to stop her from escaping. If they went to a wedding or another event, they would tie her up this way to stop her from leaving the home. And that's what maybe that man feared. But what they didn't realize is that if they had told Nina to sit there, she would have sat there. That's how afraid she was. He was afraid that she would call for help, but he didn't know how afraid she was of them. And those girls are brought up with fear. That's the only emotion that they know. It's wild to me how many people would have looked at this family from the outside and not have suspected a thing. No one would know that this was taking place in a respectable household. And the wild thing is that these people were educated. Okay. Not that, changes things a lot, but in the terms of course it changes some things, you know what I mean? Like, they knew better is what I'm trying to say. Now, if you look at the story, Nina at this point has been literally abused by nearly everyone who has crossed paths with her. Not one single person has shown her consistent love or empathy. She's still a teenager at this point, and it's all she knows. The fact that she wouldn't even move or call for help if she was told not to shows you how warped the mind can become if this is all you know from a young age. Now, the problem is also the community around them that surrounds these young girls. Nina talks about how all the other men and women in the community would talk about everybody's business, and everybody knew everybody's business, which is quite common in these types of communities. But if she was to ever escape, someone would see her, instead of helping her, they'd call, the uncle and be like, hey, she's leaving. Like, that's the problem, right? And it also speaks a little bit to that whole bystander effect situation that I've covered in so many of my videos. Now, psychologically, Nina grew up with the mentality that kids live for their parents. It's not the other way around. But it's so extreme. I mean, you don't matter. What your parents want matters. Again, this is quite common in tiger parenting, but I find this ridiculous. I didn't have children so they could live their lives for me. I didn't have children so that they could become my little slaves. I can't tell you how much I relate to this and how much this pisses me off. Pisses me off. It frustrates me that so many parents get away with this bullshit and that so many kids have lived their lives in this way and lost so much of their lives because of this mentality. Even if it's 0.5% to the degree that Nina experienced, I mean, even if it doesn't involve sexual abuse or mental abuse, it's still a thing. Putting children down as they grow up, you know, they turn into adults. They don't stay children forever. They become adults in the real world, and these parents don't realize the generational curses they are literally just passing down onto this earth. If they live their lives according to them, then they die. They just literally leave their children to pass that on to their kids. It's just so toxic, so gross, so ugh. These parents end up living their entire lives they want to live, you know, and they block their kids from ever really living a life because their kids have lived their entire life for their parents. Then their parents die, and then the kids are just kind of stuck there like, what am I supposed to do? Some of them don't even end up having their own lives, having their own kids, but those that do end up just doing the exact same thing because that's all they know. It's so toxic, and it really breeds a very unhappy human being. And they don't understand that. Nina didn't believe she deserved anything more, even when people outside her community, like workplace and workmates, were like, yo, this isn't normal. She just didn't get it. Nina fantasized about, you know, her parents showing her love and her returning to her parents with open arms. She didn't believe her parents did anything wrong because she just thought that they did what they knew, and she never held anything against them. Now, the abuse from her father-in-law, let's call him her, just got to the point it being too much for Nina to bear, and she decided like she needs to escape. She couldn't let her father-in-law continue doing what he was doing to her. But one of the main driving factors was that she knew that other daughter-in-laws in her community were facing the same horrific situation, and some were worse. A lot of them were getting abused, but some were getting murdered for things out of their control. So when Nina would walk home occasionally, she would hear girls screaming. And that was due to the fact that these girls' mother-in-laws would pour petrol over them and set them on fire. And then when the police would come, these women or families would tell the police, oh, this girl, she committed suicide. But the reality was, in that family, that daughter-in-law was not producing a son for the family. All she was doing was producing daughters, girls, and that wasn't deemed good enough, so they would kill them. I know I sound shocked, but I'm not shocked by this because I've heard of this happening so many times. So they would get rid of this girl number one and bring in a new bride who would hopefully give the family and the sons the boy that they were so desperately wanting. Now, Nina hadn't had a baby at this point, and she knew that it was coming. You know, she had been with this family 17, 18, 19, 20, 25 years at this point. She hadn't had a baby, so she knew it was coming. And the place that she lived in with this family, they had like a terrace. So when she would go to put the clothes to dry, she would hear other mother-in-laws in the neighborhoods talking in other houses, and it was hard not to hear, but she would hear them making jokes about how they got rid of the first daughter-in-law because she wasn't producing a boy, and now they brought the new one in, and hopefully the new one's going to do as she's told. Like, it's wild. So that, together with the fact that she didn't want to keep forcing her father-in-law off her anymore, made her want to leave. She was like, okay, I have to leave. She started to really dislike herself, and she wanted to just get some respect for herself. So she decided to find a way to leave. So one day she catches a bus, I believe, and goes to her parents' house, hoping so desperately to be welcomed with open arms. However, before she even got home, her parents knew she was on her way there because someone had seen her on the bus and had quickly, made a phone call and been like, hey, Nina's on the wrong bus home. I mean, she's not going home. Where is she going? I mean, I hate people like this. I hate people like this. This used to happen to me when I was a kid. It was the worst thing. I hated it. I hated it. People will call my dad and be like, I saw your daughter on this train, but she's not supposed to. Well, yeah, because I'm not going home. I'm trying to do some things and you're ruining my style. But it was like annoying. It was so annoying. So I was always like trying to do things like undercover, put a hat on, and it was like so secretive, but it was like so annoying. And she's just trying to go home to her own family, but that wasn't allowed because she hadn't seen her family in 4 years. Her family hadn't visited her in 4 or 5 years since she got married, because it was now that family's problem. As soon as Nina arrived, okay, her father grabbed her and started yelling at her and said, "You've brought shame on the family. Like, why are you here? You know, did she have a boyfriend? Is that why she was escaping? Why can't she just shut up and follow the rules?" You know, it's like, and then he called her a prostitute. So that was great. And then he drags her into that same formal guest room once again. But when Nina got there, she's begging her father, "Please let me live with you. Please let me live with you." But instead, her brother ends up joining her father. And in that same formal living room, they end up just beating Nina and beating Nina. So much so that they broke her jaw, they broke her arm, and they just kept on relentlessly beating her on that ground. And the entire time they're calling her degrading names like bitch and prostitute. And at the time, Nina believed that she deserved it all. She didn't know any different. She was just 21. Now, as they were stomping on her, Nina started to feel like this is it. You know, she was going to die, but something in her also told her, no, you need to live. This is not the end. You need to push through. And she becomes numb to it. And she sees her other brother come into the room. Her other brother tells the two of them, the brother and the dad, "You can't kill her here. You have to take her to India." And her dad was very, very, very angry, and he was just shouting, and she was just going in and out of consciousness. Like, she couldn't even move. Nina was beaten so badly, she laid there for 3 to 4 days. So this auntie comes up to Nina and she quickly tells her, "They're going to send you to India on Sunday." Nina didn't even have a chance to respond. The auntie just quickly left. She didn't have a chance to like even register what had been said to her. But she's like, "I don't want to die. If I go to India, I'm going to die." So somehow she crawled out of the house into the yard. She encounters this huge fence. And somehow she gets the strength to climb this fence, get down to the other side, and then cross the road across to this small park that was opposite the house. And she passed out in the bushes there. In and out of consciousness, she then like sees her father driving past that park in his car looking for her. She wakes up early the next morning, and this is super early in the morning before anyone is awake, and she manages to catch a taxi out of there. She did it. She escaped. Now, prior to this, Nina at her job, she became friends with another Indian woman, and this Indian woman was dating this Nigerian guy. And she trusted this woman, and this woman had told her, you know, if you ever get into any trouble, you can come and stay with me and my boyfriend. Like, we'll take care of you. So she did. She goes to this friend for help, and she ends up going to the hospital, and she had to actually stay in the hospital for a few weeks because her injuries were so extensive. Then when she goes back to this Indian woman and her boyfriend, she finds out that the couple had split up. But the boyfriend, the Nigerian guy, had said that, okay, you can live with me as long as you pay me rent. Like, it's fine. And they were only friends. And one night they went out drinking. Nina had drank a lot of Malibu and she got pretty drunk. And this friend, this guy, he ends up taking advantage of Nina and she falls pregnant. So this time, Nina decides to keep the baby, and she even asks this man, this Nigerian guy, to be with her. And in this time period, being with a man of a different culture, especially, you know, a black man, was considered super taboo. And, you know, her family was never going to accept that. Now, a lot of you guys may be like, why did she ask this guy to be with her if he had taken advantage of her? But Nina knew nothing else. She didn't know how to be treated well. She didn't know what love was. This man offered her a place to live, even though she paid rent to him, even though he took advantage of her. He possibly showed her some type of affection. She believed he was her savior. Now, Nina stayed with this man for 23 years. They had 3 children together. Now, honestly, at this point, when I heard this part, I was like, oh my God, she finally got her a happy ending, you know? this guy, he changed and they had 3 beautiful children together, and, you know, she got her happy ending. But that was not the case for Nina. In this relationship for 23 years, she suffered from domestic abuse. Nina didn't know who she was. She believed everything this man had told her. He would tell her she was fat, she was ugly, he controlled her finances. Once when she was sleeping, he set her pillow on fire because he wanted to end it all. Each night, he would lock Nina and the kids in their bedroom from 11 p.m. till 5 a.m. because he wanted to control them. He would bang Nina's head against the wall just because he could. He would drive her to places and leave her there just because he could. Nina says she was never in love with him, but she stayed with him because she just didn't know any different. And I know I keep saying that, but that is a huge factor in this story of Nina's. I mean, she didn't know any different. She wasn't taught any different. She didn't experience any different. So how would she know? She allowed him to do all those things because she just didn't believe she was worth anymore. Also, she was a people pleaser. She was raised to care about other people over herself. Now, the day she finally left him was the day social services actually removed her. And this was due to the fact, okay, this is crazy, that this man, it was just her son and her in the home, and he filled the home with gas. It was an explosion waiting to happen. Now, their daughter was the one that actually told Nina that it was the father that did it, because he had apparently sent a text to his daughter saying that he had done this to kill his wife and his son. And Nina says that her daughter was at university at the time, so she was out of the situation, right? So she claims that when you're out of the situation, you can see things a little bit clearer. And her daughter was telling her to leave her father because she just knew that this was bad things were going to happen. So after this, Nina was actually homeless for a little while until one of the ladies from her son's school helped her. So as Nina was now, trying to reset her life, trying to live her life for her children, her past came back to haunt her. One day, the police, they come looking for Nina, and they wanted to tell her that her father had been arrested. Now, her father was arrested because he had abducted a 6-year-old girl that was Nina's sister that she didn't even know existed. He had an affair with a Polish lady, and she gave birth to this child. So to hide this shame, this whole illegitimate child, he got this Polish lady drunk, and then he took the little girl and kidnapped her and took her from country to country within Europe until they eventually got to India. And then he left her in a school in India. Like, what? I like, what the freaking frigs? Like, oh my God, who does that to a little girl? A little 6-year-old. Like, just think about how scared she would have been. And then you just leave her in another, like a whole different country in a school. Like, what is wrong with this man? I'm sorry, Nina, but holy moly, it's so terrifying. The police were charging him with abduction, but they needed to know from Nina who this man was, how he was related to her. And she tells the police how she was so badly beaten, years ago in what was an attempted honor killing, but she had no proof. So there goes that. Her father went to prison and was released in 2021, but upon his release, the whole community welcomed him with open arms. People believed, and I quote, acted in a very honorable way to retain the honor within his family. Her father now wears a turban and is a very respected member within the Desi community in the UK, and he owns a bunch of bars and pubs. But look, Nina, despite everything that she's been through and the way her life, progressed, Nina still has room in her heart for her parents. As a survivor of these horrific acts, Nina's courage, her bravery, her unimaginable strength has led her to dedicate her life to change. By her father, forced to marry into her rapist's family, abused and almost killed by her own family, only to escape, and then only to be abused and almost killed by the father of her children. I mean, this sounds like something out of a book, something that's not real. But it's the very real life of Nina Aouilk, abused and mistreated by every person she encountered. The fact that she went through these experiences and came out as a survivor is absolutely incredible, amazing. Nina is now a strong activist that is committed to bringing awareness to the issues of honor killings, human trafficking, and forced marriage. I wanted to quickly give some stats on these kinds of issues. And according to The Guardian, the number of honor-based abuse, including assault and death threats, is rising with an increase of 81%. The true extent of agony, torment, and pain that these women in these communities are facing is just unthinkable, but it's happening. Nina is such an inspiring woman, and it's women like her that make me so proud to be a woman myself, because we are strong. We go through some shit. The strength it takes to survive what she did and then to come out and smile. I mean, Nina has the most beautiful smile. And just to see the fact that she can still experience happiness is so inspiring. She is a huge activist and has even done a TED Talk. So I highly recommend watching that. I'm going to link it below. I honestly recommend watching everything she's done because she is so inspiring and so well-spoken, and I really respect her so much. I wanted to read you something she said. She said, "It's never been about me. It's about the people that are out there that need that message to resonate with my voice, my experiences. To say to them that I found freedom, and freedom for me doesn't mean going out in the way it's described in the Asian community. It's just simple things like not wandering around your own home in fear, to be able to live with the dignity of basic human rights, to have that ability to love yourself." And how true is that? How true is that? It's not about, wanting to go to the club. It's literally about being able to have freedom within yourself. Nina is now a successful empowerment coach and international speaker. She even has a book titled Master Your Life, Live the Life of Your Dreams, which came out in 2021. I will leave her details in the description box, and she also has an organization called End Honor Killings, which I believe you can donate to. So guys, let me know your thoughts on this topic, on Nina's story. I mean, I want to do a couple more cases about this topic, and I know it's distressing, but I think it's really important to spread awareness about it. I mean, if we can share some of these women's stories so we can truly understand what women in these situations go through. I mean, you don't have to be a woman to empathize and understand how this isn't right, but it's still taking place today. You wouldn't imagine it, but it is. And it's so upsetting. Yes, I know, but it's also like, I don't understand how you do that to your own daughter, your sister, these moms who are involved in it. I'm like, that could have been them, So if you guys have any cases that you know of that you would like me to look into and share, please leave them in the comments below. Please go and look more into Nina's story. If you are interested, please donate if you can to this cause. It would really help these women so much. And I'm sure just talking about it and being aware of it will also bring light to it so that it hopefully stops. I pray that this situation stops. Let me know your thoughts on this case down below, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And I will see you in the next one. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.